All right, the red line is on and we are recording. Welcome everyone to another week of the Weekly SITREP. I'm Mark from the Veteran Professional. This is Kyle from SITREPs to Circos. And every week we get together and we review some of the big stories from the world of business and politics, all in an effort to help you if you're on your way out of the military, you're trying to think about what you want to do back out in the civilian world. All in an effort to give you information, kind of give you some perspective of what's being talked about in the civilian world. You can use this information if you're going to, interviews at schools or going for a job interview, or you're trying to figure out like what type of industry you want to land in after the military. That's all we're trying to do is paint a better picture for you for what life outside the uniform is like. So this has been a pretty crazy week in the world of business, and Kyle and I are going to do have some really fun conversations today about GameStop, as I'm sure you all have heard of all that, and there's a lot we can dig into there. But before we get into all the business stuff, we always start off with the mission brief. And so this is defense, security related news that we as veterans can kind of understand and appreciate, and it's just a way for us to kind of start getting into the world here. So first one here. So the Air Force just launched its first use of artificial intelligence, where AI was controlling a piece of an aircraft. So Kyle, do you want to talk about this one a bit? Because I know you worked in the world of aviation.
Yeah, this is really cool, right? Because, a big difference between aircraft and, say, cars, for example, our aircraft have had not fully autonomous autopilots, but really robust autopilots for a really long time, right? Um, and if you can kind of think about it, right? Like, say if you're in an airliner and that airliner is like, they've done they're doing the takeoff roll, right, and they rotate, which would be the aviation term for it. And as soon as those airline pilots got it off a certain height off the ground, they throw the wheels up, they engage the flight director and couple it with what's called the flight management system. And so the flight director is what you kind of use to control like altitude, speed, etc. And the FMS system has like navigation and all this stuff. And so the two are coupled, right? And so now they're working. And so there's always kind of been this robust autopilot, right? As opposed to cars, which speaking as a proud Tesla owner, cars have just kind of now recently started to come into
Right.
their own, right? And driving is in many ways more complicated than flying, right? Because there's so many more obstacles on the ground. And so this is really cool what they've done here. They've almost kind of taken like they're starting to apply machine learning to aircraft here. And so what the Air Force did is it's done this test where it deployed artificial intelligence on the U-2. And so they did this using this human machine teaming Tuesday or last Tuesday using an artificial intelligence algorithm operated by the U2's sensor navigation system. So it's the first time that artificial intelligence has controlled any part of an aircraft in U.S. military history. And so this algorithm called ART-U, I can't pronounce it. That's some symbol that I don't know.
Right.
Worked with this U2 pilot to execute a reconnaissance mission during a simulated missile strike. The Air Force announced in a press release today, will be last Tuesday. Oh no, this was December 16th. I'm sorry. And so they searched for enemy launchers while the pilot looked for threatening aircraft, and the two shared responsibility for the Dragon Lady's radar. So after takeoff, the sensor control was positively handed off to the ART-U, who then manipulated the sensor based off insight previously learned from over 500,000 computer simulated training iterations. And so what I'm kind of taking here is they've offloaded some of the pilot workload to this system that's now doing it where the pilot would actually have had to make decisions on how the sensor operated and like they had to like think about like, okay, like if this is happening and I see this, I should be doing this. Well, the sensor is just doing it all on its own, right? And so you had this human machine teaming, and they actually put these pods on the U2 to contain the data processing equipment necessary for the machine learning to work. And this is something common in aviation, right?
Right.
You'll see fighter aircraft with sensor pods on them and everything, but this is like a machine learning pod that's now attached to the aircraft. So really interesting stuff. It's kind of like when you think about, a robot's going to replace people, right? That's always kind of the concern, right? You got to think about more like human machine pairing, right? How can
Yeah.
an algorithm
Yeah.
or a machine make a human like 30 times more effective, so really interesting stuff. And I mean, they're doing data streaming and machine learning at the edge of space. It's crazy. So very exciting stuff. And who knows, like when you see test beds like this, maybe like 5 years down the road, it's going to be like in every aircraft. Like really cool stuff.
Right, right. And I think it's kind of cool seeing the defense industry like helping lead the way in the world of like AI and machine learning. I mean, obviously there's huge commercial potential for these technologies, and lots of companies are investing tons of money in this as well. Um, but I think it kind of, as we know, a lot of the huge pieces of software and technology that we use in our everyday lives have been because of DoD funded research to figure something out. GPS being a prime example there. So I'm sure something will come out of the AI machine learning space from this national security perspective that then we have some type of application for in the civilian world.
Yeah, and as somebody, I work in defense innovation now. It's
Right.
kind of like defense innovation, venture capital space. There's a lot out there, right? And we're just now really beginning to, uh, scratch the surface, right? And as soon as the military kind of figures out, and they're working on this, how to effectively, do seed capital and work with startups, right? Like there's going to be a golden age of assuming we all don't die in a nuclear fire or something. I mean, I don't know. There'll be like a golden
Who
age
knows,
of
man? It's 2021.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Terminator stuff. So yeah, no, it's interesting, and it's cool to see.
All right. So the next story we're going to get into, I think at first glance may not sound like it's directly related to the military or something. We're going to get right into GameStop and talk about. So some people have made some giant windfalls of money this last week and a half from
Yeah.
this craziness. But with that will come taxes that you have to pay on that. And probably for most people, it's going to be in the short term capital gains range. So I know the
Yeah.
way I thought about this one, Kyle, was a lot of you out there. If you're listening, you might be on active duty. You probably have some junior soldiers, sailors, airmen, and marine
Yeah.
who, were on Reddit, who were on Robinhood, and YOLO stocked their GameStop all the way up, and now some 19-year-old kid from Iowa is sitting on tens of thousands of dollars that they don't exactly know what to do with. And so I think it's just worth saying that you might have some people like that in your formation, and they might need some help and some mature guidance on what to do with this.
Yeah, short-term capital gains, because most people, the average person is not really being affected by this, right?
Right. Right.
But there was an opportunity, and so I were talking about this before the show started. The entire week, was having people send me like screenshots of their like deep out of the money option calls that people had picked up, right? Using Robinhood, right, and based off obviously like Wall Street bets, and people watching this deep effing value guy, and so they people are saying to me like, hey, like I've this option call is worth 30 grand. This option call is worth 50 or 50 or 40 or 50 or 60. There was a guy on the West Point the West Point Wall Street Bets forum on Facebook who made over $1 million. Over $1 million, right? On these really deep option calls that he'd probably been stacking since like
Right.
I don't know, like May of last year or something. And it's important to understand that if you're like a military leader, or you've got people in your formation, you need to talk about them. You need to talk to them about this, right? Because short-term capital gains tax will eat into people's earnings like acid. And so when people finally when people begin to unwind or are unwinding their positions in here, right? Because I personally, this cannot go on forever. It's a bubble. It's
Right.
wild speculation that the fundamentals, and we'll talk about this in the next segment, about kind of the fundamentals of GameStop are not there in any way, shape, or form to support this valuation. You could have somebody like say like a short-term capital game, right? It can take up to 40% of your earnings, right? If you're fairly wealthy. And this has to do with other taxes that get kind of piled on top of it.
Right.
But and also there's like states that tax capital gains as ordinary income, right? And so when you think about capital gains tax, right, long-term capital gains tax is usually, which is different than short-term, long-term capital gains tax is usually taxed at a favorable rate other than what we would call W-2 income, which is income you'd get from a job. And the reason for that is because the government wants to promote investing, right?
Right.
And so they say, hey, invest money, and what you make off of that investment will be taxed less than what you make from your ordinary job. And this pisses some people off, but at a fundamental level, it's a good idea. But the short-term capital gains tax is not, it taxes people much higher than the W-2 rate because it's taxing speculation essentially.
Right.
And the government is, what certainly speculation is, a way to make money, but it isn't really investing in companies. So,
Right.
You could have a soldier say they made like $30,000 or $40,000. They unwind that position. They spend it on, I mean, I don't know, like an F1, like a Ford Raptor or something. I mean, whatever soldiers spend stupid shit on. Or, one of my soldiers, when I was a platoon leader, a flight platoon leader, had spent $20,000 on zombie Sesame Street Cookie Monster tattoos all over his body. And I was like, bro, you ever heard of like an IRA? But like that's what he wanted to do, which is fine.
Hey,
It's fucking
yeah.
stupid, but like, it's okay, right?
It's your body. Do your thing, but yeah.
Yeah, but like so people could spend all this money, and then at the end of the tax year, be like, I don't have any money because suddenly I owe the government $20,000 or something.
Right.
Right. And that's going to be a big problem, right? Because where are you going to get the money from, right? You're going to have to take out a loan that has like a high interest rate. Like, what are you going to go to like AER and be like, hey, I need an emergency relief loan because I owe the IRS $30,000 off my GameStop, short-term capital gains tax that I had no idea, right? So something you should probably talk to the people in your formation about, and maybe direct them to get some financial advice, right?
Right.
Just something to consider.
Yeah.
There's no free lunch out there,
Yeah.
and obviously great for them for making money, but yeah, just be careful.
Yeah. I think especially given the timing in the year, right? Because they're not going to pay taxes on this until next year, really. There's going to be a huge gap between like what people think they, have to pay and what they're actually paying, right? And so, yeah, I'm sure on whatever base you're at, there's some type of financial assistance, financial counseling office or something. Take your soldier, whatever, down there and just sit down with someone and like come up with a game plan to help them, keep as much money as they possibly can and do so in a responsible manner. That's all we ask.
Yeah. Just be careful, right? Like, unlike, when you go like on a deployment, right, and you get all this tax-free money, this money is very definitely taxable.
Definitely taxed.
And Uncle Sam will come after that ass because don't think you can't report it either. Because what happens if people don't know, right, is what happens is when you have like investments or, whatever, or, income, unless it's like really under the table, what happens is if you get issued a tax statement from, say, Robinhood is also sending that tax statement to the IRS.
Yeah.
Like the IRS has all the info, right? They just put the burden on you to actually figure out your taxes because the IRS, I guess, like theoretically knows what your tax liability is, but they want you to basically tell them, hey, this is what I think my actual tax liability is based off my individual circumstances and deductions that I could take advantage of. So don't think you could like just not report it because they will figure it out and come after you. So just be careful.
The two things in life that are certain are death and taxes. They won't get theirs.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay. All right. Let's dig some more into GameStop here beyond. So we're going to transition to the Civvy SITREP. So this is like totally focused on news from the business and politics world out in the civilian world. So we kind of talked about GameStop already, mostly from a, what do you do with soldiers in your formation who possibly came upon giant windfalls of money and might have some unforeseen, taxes and financial obligations that they're now trying to do. But let's kind of get into exactly what the hell happened this last week with GameStop. So Kyle, kind of based on like what we've seen thus far, like what is your understanding of how this craziness happened?
Yeah. So there, GameStop, and I've talked about this a lot on SITREPs, right? But GameStop is really this is not a new phenomenon. First off, right?
Right.
These sort of stock market manias have been around forever, and this is just the latest iteration of them, right? And when we say mania, what we mean is there's some sort of like bubble essentially, right? Where people are just like buying into something and riding the momentum, right? You're not trading, or you're not trading off fundamentals, which would be like, cash flow, for example, for the free cash flow of a company. What you're trading off of is market momentum, right? And so if you see the market going up, right, you're jumping in on that and basically riding the wave. Well, the wave is going to crash at some point, and when it does, some people will get hurt. There's just no way about it, especially people, I think, who've uh where they're not using, maybe like some, limited option trading, but instead they're going all in on the underlying asset of GameStop stock, right? And so, like, if you don't know, right, like there's different ways to like invest in. Investing is a loose term, right? This is just speculation, but you can buy like stock, right? Or you can buy options that allow you to either go long or short. And so what happened here is this coordinated, these Wall Street bets, Reddit forum, there's stuff on Twitter as well, Instagram, meme stunks. There was almost like a coordinated pumping up of the stock price, right?
Oh,
And so
absolutely.
you had these people on Wall Street bets who had helped, identify where there was some big short positions taken up by some large hedge funds at GameStop. And GameStop is a company that's had a lot of challenges, right, due to shifting macroeconomic shifting macroeconomic environment, shifting consumer behavior as we've gone more to e-commerce, right? We talked about this last week, and so uh, people kept piling into this stock, right? People, like everybody, using Robinhood, and if you've never used Robinhood before, it's it's a trading app, right? And it earns, and you can trade commission free essentially.
Yeah.
So
And it's
there's
super
like,
easy to trade.
it's super easy. It's incredibly easy, right? And I was actually looking at option chains over the week, and they make option chains really easy to understand, which is, having been to business school and taking, a class about derivatives, not the easiest thing to understand, right?
Right.
And instead, you got people who are doing option trading, right? And so they're able to pump up this stock, right? And as they're pumping up this stock, right? And like I said, we talked about this last week. These large hedge funds that had these huge short positions. We're seeing like, hey, we need to unwind our short positions here quickly, right? By buying the underlying asset to start to close it out, which puts in this short squeeze, right? Because people are now bidding to buy up to buy up the stock, right, which raises the price. And the stock went from something like what is it? I've got the number here. Let me make sure I want to get this right. Uh, yeah, like at the start of the year, the stock was trading at like $17, and it went up to over $400 a share early Thursday. So this last Thursday, which gives GameStop a market cap of roughly 28 billion. To put that in perspective, right? To put that in perspective, let me share with you when their last quarterly filing was, which was the third quarter of last year, which was right before they closed out their annual
Right.
at the end of the year. So when we talk about market cap, what we're talking about is share price times number of shares outstanding. And so it's that simple of a calculation, right?
So that's basically just like the value of that stock all across the stock market. I think is just like the best way to look at it. So like if I'm buying GameStop, excuse me, for $17, and they have a million shares outstanding, then the market capital is $17 million. Just
Yeah.
to do like a
So
rough math there for everybody.
yeah, so at the end of third quarter of last year, they had a market cap of $682 million, essentially, and an enterprise value of 1.11 billion. An enterprise value is market cap plus debt plus minority interest minus cash. I'm pretty sure that's the formula.
That sounds
Uh,
right. I had that last
yeah,
quarter. I
no,
forget the way.
nobody at me if I mess something up, right? And if you look at their if you look at their metrics here, right? Their enterprise value to revenue. So when financial analysts look at stocks, right, they look at different metrics, right? So one is like enterprise value to revenue, and so that's literally enterprise value, which is what I just quoted. So 1.11 billion divided by their revenue, which I don't see their revenue here, but whatever. And so the metric was a multiple of 1.11, right? And then their enterprise value to EBITDA was negative. You know, so not like the best stock, right?
Right.
You know, like clearly one that was having a lot of trouble. Yeah, I think their enterprise value to EBITDA was
Yeah.
negative 25. And
If,
so
if you
current,
if you're an analyst looking at this stock right now, you're not being like, oh yeah, this is the blue chip that we're gonna go long on. Most people are
yeah,
probably not gonna make that bet.
yeah, and their EBITDA is negative, which isn't good either. So, but you know, we won't get into that too much, right? Because we'll start to get more complicated. But for
Right.
comparison, right? So their market cap was $682, 682 million. Their enterprise value was 1.11 billion. So currently, their market cap is 22.67 billion. So we went from 682 million to 22 billion, right?
In
That's
a couple of months, pretty much.
yeah,
Yeah.
in a couple of months, right? And there is absolutely nothing in the stock that supports those underlying metrics. There's nothing fundamental about the stock that that could ever justify that market cap or this enterprise value, which is 23.38 billion. And it shot up their enterprise value to EBITDA metric to negative 256. So I mean, it's crazy, right? It's total speculation. There's nothing that supports that share price, right? But you have to remember that if you're messing around with this stock, you could at some point the wave's going to break, and who knows when that's going to be, and you will get burned if you are in a position, right, where you're long on the stock and you're basically hoping that it's going to keep rising, and at some point this will pop, right, and people will get hurt. As funny as this is and kind of hilarious, and so Robinhood here had to, it got so volatile, right? The volatility was immense, and right, and these hedge funds were having issues. That Robinhood halted the trading of the stock on
Yeah. Very
Thursday, and
controversial move.
yeah, and also AMC, and a lot of people are saying like, oh, this is people figured out how to make money, and they're and they're screwing the retail investor, right? And and I guess like at a level that makes sense, right? There's this almost kind of like mix of populism that goes into it. But you do have to realize that these companies are well within their rights to do it. People are like, is it illegal? What can be done about it? I'm like, the Robinhood's terms of service, if you read them, it's very clear. They can do this. They don't have to trade on it, right? But it was a huge brand. It was very damaging to their brand too, because
Right.
they've said, hey, stock market trading is for everybody. But now it looks like they're doing it, to protect hedge funds, right? Which really isn't true. They've got an IPO that's coming up. They've got investors, they're trying to protect their company, right, to have a successful IPO here. And I also got like a ton of DMs. Like it was crazy, right? I had to like work through like 100 DMs of like people would never talk to me before.
Right.
And they're like, what's a better trading app than Robinhood? I'm like, guys, the app is fine, right? Like this is
Yeah.
just like a once in like this is a mania, right? Like this is a
Right.
stock market mania, right? And so like don't think that like Robinhood is screwing you. They're trying to figure out like how can we protect our company and protect our customers, right? So yeah,
And I
it's
think
it's wild.
there's even a level of protection there for GameStop and AMC too. Like
Yeah.
if you're trying to run these companies and then like every day, you're looking at the stock price and it's just going bonkers crazy, and there's not also a then correlation to necessarily like an increased value in like what you as a company and what you as a business are actually doing, right? Like nothing changed in GameStop's business model. They didn't like uncover some new secret video game or something that was going to revolutionize the world, massively increase their business. That's
Yeah.
not what happened. I mean, they hired a new e-commerce executive who everyone had some big hopes for and everything, but this insane increase that we've seen in the stock price is in no way equivalent to the amount of value that this one person is going to bring to GameStop.
Yeah, I did hear that one thing, some people were like, well, could they issue more, equity, right? And like, yeah, I guess they could, technically do an equity follow-on offering. It's not like something you can just snap your fingers, right? And,
Right.
and it happens, right? But ironically, if, they would do that, they would be able to get more money, right? Because just because a stock price goes up, a company's stock goes up, doesn't mean that company suddenly has more cash, right? That isn't how it works. They could issue more equity, which would dilute the current pool of equity, and they would be able to, at the current price, right? They would be able to get a ton more money. But ironically, it would actually help hedge funds unwind their short position, because now there'd be more, shares that they could basically borrow to cover their shorts, right? And it would drive the price down. And I think I saw one I forget if it was like kind of like a whale investor, or if it was an institution, but had something like, several $1 million like invested in GameStop, and they sold it, like, and they like cashed out. It was like over like $1 billion that they cashed out in or something, and they were like, hell yeah, we're taking our money and running, right?
Yeah.
So there are institutional winners on this as well, which is
Yeah.
important to remember. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
wild for sure.
One kind of like technical thing that I think we should get into right now for everybody. So we've talked about like shorts and longs and options and everything. I just want to do a quick kind of talk about like what an option is. Um, more people have probably heard about options and like considered options in the last week and a half because of all this. And I saw a stat the other day that, like, the last week had more options trading than ever in any point in history.
Yeah, the options
It was
volume
just
was
going
huge.
crazy. So I just want to point out that like this is what an option is when you're trading. Typically, and there's all kinds of stuff going on here, but the basic form, you have either what's called a call or a put. And essentially what you're doing is you're trying to either um, invest, assuming with a call that the stock price is going to go up, or with a put that it's going to go down. And what an option can do is it can help you lever up really quickly. So like, what does that mean, right? So let's say I buy a call option contract that my $10 stock is going to go up to $15. Okay. Then if it hits that $15 price, I can then buy that stock at $10. So now I'm getting more value at a lower price. Okay. On the reverse end, I can say it's going to go down, right? So I can say, okay, my $10 stock is going to go down to $5 and I'm going to sell it. Now, if it hits $5, I sell it, but I don't sell it at the $5 price. I sell it at the $10 price. That's just the bare bone basics to understand of what options and like how they work and why people can use them to lever up very quickly, because you're able to get, bigger bang for a smaller amount of money.
Yeah, and I think maybe to maybe extrapolate that a little bit, right? An option is a form of a derivative, right? When you think of derivative, you're deriving value from the price, right? And the value is being derived from some asset, right? And so when we say options contract, right? Like, for example, somebody, people were sending me some screenshots of the stuff they're doing on Robinhood, and they were saying like, oh, hey, I got into a long call option at I think it was like with at $3.85 per contract, and with a strike price of 60 for GameStop, right? And so when you and an expiration date of January 29th. And so what that means is option contracts are, if you buy an option contract, right, it represents 100 shares of the underlying asset, and that underlying asset is the stock, right? So you say like, hey, this option contract has a price of $3.85. When you go to buy it, you're going to be spending 3.85 times 100, because the 100 represents 100 shares of the underlying asset, so $385. And so you're essentially, there's that option premium, right? And so then you factor in that option premium to the strike price to give you a break even point. And so, hey, you're going to take that, and it's going to be, what is it, $63.85 is
Right.
what the break even point is. And you have to have the stock rise above that strike price to then be what's called in the money. And that's where you're making a profit. And then there's an expiration date, at least for American options, associated with the with an option contract, right? And so, hey, if you hear the strike price, the expiration date was January 29th, you are saying that if I buy this options contract, I'm hoping that it's going to be in the money by the expiration date, because if we
Right.
hit their expiration date, the option contract expires worthless if it's not in the money. And so people like kind of use these as a way to make a bet, right? Essentially, and it gives you risk exposure. That's kind of one of the terms to use to an asset without actually having to buy the whole asset, right? So you say like, hey, I want exposure to GameStop stock, but I don't want to put $10,000 into the stock.
Right.
Instead, I can buy this option contract where the only amount of money I'm risking is $385. And now, granted, the options are way more expensive now. If you look at the options chains on Robinhood, they're like really expensive. It's like $15,000 to get exposure. But it allows you to basically, what was the term I use? You get the cow with you get the milk without buying the cow, essentially.
Yeah.
And so you can get massive exposure, and you can buy like as much of these option contracts as are available on the market, right? You want to buy $10,000 worth of options contracts, and that's how people can end up supercharging there are these gains, right, where somebody can make like $1 million off of GameStop, right? Because like to go and actually get the money to then pour into the underlying asset, which is the stock, it's super risky, right? Because it opens you up to a single asset with a single risk, and you have to front all that money, right? Whereas if you you just take an options contract, you're just risking the options or the premium for the options contract, assuming you're not selling like puts, right? If you sell put, like the downside is like unlimited.
Yeah.
So but like for that guy who made like $1 million right off the USMA, what that West Pointer, a 25-year-old West Pointer, if he was to call that contract, right, he would have to go put up money then to go actually buy the stock, right? Because the only thing he'd put up was the option premium, and in that case, you'd be calling up your a private banker essentially, or you'd find a private banker would find you, and you'd be like,
Right.
yeah, I need you to front me some money so I can exercise
Yeah.
this options contract. But it's complicated, right? So if I've confused you, you don't feel like you're dumb, right? Options, because they have a different vocabulary and a different kind of way of thinking, can
Right.
get confusing.
Yeah. I think after this we'll start a TikTok channel about options trading on Robinhood. What do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely.
100%, man.
That's what all the cool kids are doing. Some of the
Yeah.
TikToks I've seen were just like stocks only go up, and I'm like, is this like a parody? Is this
This is
real?
like people are actually saying this. It's wild. Yeah.
You know what? The one good thing that's going to come
Rocket
out of
ship
this,
to the moon, baby.
I mean, it's really funny, right? But I think maybe the one good thing that comes out of this is people are becoming more aware of investing, which is
Right.
investing is very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need to do it, right, because of inflation and the time value of money. But
Right. Right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we got a couple other topics we want to get into. You got anything else you want to see on GameStop?
Yeah, I will say it's been funny to watch the celeb reaction. It's kind of united a bunch of different ideological spectrums, right? You had like AOC and Ted Cruz both like hammering away at GameStop, but really it's more about populism, saying like, how could you do this to hurt the small man? Like, yeah, like whatever, they don't fucking care. Like Ted Cruz doesn't care about the small person. It's just funny to kind of see like the different ideological spectrums that have piled into it, or like Dave Portnoy and like Barstool Sports saying it's criminal. I'm like, it's not criminal. Like bottom line, it's not criminal for Robinhood to stop trading. They're well within their rights to do it. But it is something that I think people should be aware of, when they hear that, because it is a form of populism, which seems to be the soup du jour of the the 2020, the 2020s, I guess.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna move out of GameStop because I think we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but that's not the
Yes.
point here. Totally. Next story we want to move into is a rift that is going on between Apple and Facebook. Okay. So Apple is set to set to release a new update. And essentially, what's expected to happen is that within that update, you as the user on your Apple product will be able to have greater autonomy over what and how much data is released to third-party people, third-party apps that are you're using on your phone. So what that could mean is like, you get your Apple iPhone, you go in there and you can you have a lot more autonomy over the data settings about, what Facebook or Instagram or Google or whatever is going to get from you and your phone. So what this is doing, one, it's positioning Apple in this place where like they're putting up like a wall between, the consumer, the end consumer, and all of the apps and businesses and companies out there that use the Apple Store to get their apps and products in front of people. Okay. Now, a company like Facebook looks at this and it's potentially bad for their business because they rely on getting that data to then use that to create ads and package it up to sell to you as you're using their platform. So, what do you think is gonna happen between Apple and Facebook, man?
Apple has in the recent years positioned itself in a manner as to it to become the privacy company, really saying
Right.
like, hey, if you use our products, our promise to you is that your information will be private and secure, and that's appealing to a lot of people. On the inverse of that, a lot of people really like using social media, right? And
Yeah.
social media thrives off these algorithms and learning and gleaning information about you to build profiles where it can then recommend stuff to you, right? And it, there are some, I think, serious societal questions about is that good for society, right? Because like say you're into conspiracy theories, and if you know me, I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories in any way, shape, or form for a variety of reasons. But
But
if
they're
you're
always
into
fun
that,
to talk about.
I mean, yeah, they're fun to talk about, but that also kind of goes to the point, right? Is if you kind of get into this, right, these social media algorithms will essentially juice them
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
can get all this information about who you are and your demographics, and like basically just like feed you as much right as you can take, like way more, than you could ever find on your own, and it leads into this massive propagation of disinformation, and Facebook and I love me some Facebook and Instagram, right? It has, it thrives off this, right? It uses these series of apps and like consumer data to basically promote, like groups or things you might be interested in, right? If you click like on like a subject, right, then all of a sudden you have all this stuff showing up that is related to that. And Apple wants to cut that off essentially with this new update. And it is a big threat to Facebook's core business. And the Apple CEO, Tim Cook, essentially called out Facebook directly without using their name. He said Tim Cook condemned conspiracy theories juiced by algorithms and tied recent social unrest to an argument that app tracking tools are turning consumers into advertising products. And his argument essentially was this was the path of least resistance to take as this technology matured,
Right.
and said, hey, we can, advertising has existed long before all this technology came around, and he basically said advertising will continue to exist, but he doesn't believe Apple's products should be um, the kind of originators of this data that these other
Right.
companies use to then find ways to advertise or promote stuff to you, or lead you to groups, right? Because what Facebook wants you to do is become, hey, you're so engrossed in these different groups that these algorithms we show you, that then we can tie in advertising that goes directly to you, right? And it's a way of keeping you engaged and never letting you go. That is the core business. And they want, and Apple wants to, and Tim Cook is like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's a big threat to Facebook's business. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the risk exposure, the market dynamic. Facebook hasn't really talked about it a whole lot, but things could change here, and they could change because of basically pseudo private regulation is the way to put it, instead of having the government, which quite frankly, the government just, as somebody who's worked for the government, and you have a lot of people here work for the government, they're just not capable of understanding this in any
No.
way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
The whole GDPR stuff that the EU enacted, has already kind of hurt their business, right? And I see it on my Instagram, right? Because I have all these analytics on my Instagram about like who's doing what with my posts and everything. And I've already started to see some of these analytics get, diminished or not as useful because of GDPR regulations over in the EU, right? Which you have soldiers, the core audience is in the vet pro is veterans, right? Or
Right.
active duty or whatever.
Right.
And the people over in Europe can't, like I can't see how if they like my stuff, if they don't, and so like think about how much that would hurt people who do digital advertising.
Right.
Is it a net good? I don't know. Tim Cook thinks it is. So, but Tim Cook's going to sell iPhones regardless. So,
Yeah. I think if nothing else, the App Store and the Google Play Store are just like they're the clearinghouses for pretty much any business, honestly. Like you have to like you're either, putting an app directly on their market for consumers to get to, or you're advertising via an app that's on their market that consumers can get to. And Apple's just throwing like a giant rock in the stream and saying, this is what we can do. And everyone else says you have to move around us because essentially we're the clearinghouse for everybody else. And
yeah.
you have to figure it out.
Yeah. And it's, they're probably well within their rights to do it, right? And
Yeah.
that pisses people off, and this will be a story that we will be talking about in the
Yeah.
future,
Yeah. Definitely.
for some time, right? I mean, you even had, was it from government regulations in Europe and California to Google's announced plans to get rid of third-party cookies, right? Like, so there is a movement against this sort of this sort of tech that has enabled a lot of crazy or interesting behavior out
Yeah.
there. So.
Yeah. So kind of in line with this, We're looking at an article right now about Facebook hiring their first chief compliance officer. Okay, and so like, what is a chief compliance officer? It's kind of exactly what it sounds like. Okay, this is the person who, in the Facebook model here, they report directly to um, the general counsel at Facebook, and they are there to ensure that Facebook is in compliance with all rules, laws, and regulations that are out there. All right.
But
So
also to manage risk too.
right,
But
right,
because like when you think of compliance, right? And I know compliance sounds like the most boring thing on the planet, which it
right.
is, right? But compliance is also a measurement of government regulations and self-imposed limits that companies put on themselves, right?
Yes, yeah,
Like when I worked at my past firm, uh, there, because I worked in the M&A group, there was a lot of compliance measures, right? Like on stocks you could trade, other things, right? That had to be, and there were also like limits that the company itself put on it as a way to just limit risk. Like when you hear about risk in the
yeah.
corporate world, one of those things are like reputational risk, brand risk, legal risk, regulatory risk, right? Companies want to limit their exposure to these risk factors because they
Great
can
point.
affect their business, right? And that's one of the things that compliance officers do. And Facebook has always had a compliance officer, right? But this is the first one that's basically like the chief compliance officer that's going to report directly is going to report directly to Facebook's general counsel and their board, that their board committee that oversees audit and risk. And Facebook is really concerned, quite rightly, as we just talked about, that there is a tidal wave of either regulatory, by governments or um, by by corporations or their partners that they do business with that are going to affect their business, right? And so, say in the past example, if they find it's something with Apple, right, like they're doing something that could it could lead them to some sort of risk exposure with what Apple views as privacy use of data on their products, right? Like they have to evaluate is that going to be good for us, right? And so this is a hire like this is a telltale sign that Facebook knows things are coming. And if you're an investor
Yeah,
too, you would see something like this. Like this is something, if you were an actual like intrinsic, a value investor, not a wild speculator, right? You would take a look at this, and I guess even if you're a speculator too, but you would take a look at this and say, hey, maybe I'm not going to be as bullish on Facebook now because I can see that they're making moves internally to um, to do things because they see that their business is being threatened. Or you could also make a case that, hey, Facebook is now taking steps to ensure that their core business stays intact, right? And so maybe I could be more bullish on it. Like that's the sort of like way you would look at this, right?
right.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's 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 interesting, but something that caught my eye for sure.
yeah. So kind of tied in with this story, well, we looked at this piece. So it's an op-ed by Mark Weinstein. So he's the founder and CEO of uh, MeWe, which is some type of social media startup. I had never heard of them before, but so he submitted this op-ed to the Wall Street Journal, basically saying that Section 230, which we've talked about on the show before, Section 230 needs to remain in place because it helps startups. Okay. So the reason we wanted to bring this one up, so we've talked about 230 before, and essentially what this does is it separates, platforms from liability from what people post, right? So
Yeah,
if
content.
right, in content, right? So if I go on and post something about, I don't know, whatever crazy ass bullshit I want to post something about, Facebook can't then get sued because of what me, Mark Delaney, posted on there. Okay. That's protected underneath 230. All right. So conceivably, if 230 were to get repealed, all right, what would then happen is smaller companies, so like a company like Facebook, like we're seeing, they hire this chief compliance officer to help them manage risk across their enterprise. Okay, so like they have the ability to hire the lawyers and legal teams to deal with the possible legal ramifications that would come if someone posted something, right, and they were legally viable to this. However, if you're a smaller company, that's way harder to do. Legal costs are expensive, lawyers are expensive, compliance teams are expensive, especially when you're trying to grow a company. And so this guy's arguing that any repeal or significant change of 230 would greatly hinder, potential competition against the major social media brands that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I generally agree with that. Uh, I'm a fan of Section 230. You might, you heard, if you're the casual observer, this past election cycle, which was an insane one, you would have heard all these people on both the left and the right, but definitely very much on the right, saying like,
Yeah.
because Trump said we need to get rid of Section 230 because they're censoring. But Section 230, actually benefits people because it allows people to say, whatever kind of whatever they want, and the social media companies don't feel like they have to be held liable for it.
Right.
Now, social media companies can self-regulate because they want to protect, like we just talked about risk and compliance. They want to protect themselves against risk, right? But these social media companies, we already have some very entrenched incumbents here, which would be a way to look at it. I mean, like Facebook, obviously, Google, and you want to have innovation always in the marketplace, because innovation creates jobs, innovation grows companies, innovation helps the economy quite a bit, and innovation helps against monopolistic entities, right? So if you got rid of Section 230, you would then be imposing a huge compliance cost on much smaller companies that don't have the capital to compete, right? And think about it. Like, if you were trying to invest in a smaller company, right? Like, say this MeWe folks, right? And you're saying like, hey, I think people are going to leave Facebook, right? Because Facebook is, regulating speech, or
Because it's
whatever.
Facebook. Yeah.
Because it's Facebook, right? And
Yeah.
and people are going to go to MeWe, and you're saying like, hey, if I'm an investor, or and I'm trying to help this company expand and grow, right? Like, why would I invest money in this company when I know it's going to face these huge headwinds, which
Right.
is an investor term to look at it, with compliance, right? And whereas Facebook can just hire armies of lawyers and compliance officers, right? And they can easily buttress this regulation, and so, something to consider, I think, for sure, right? There's no people should really look on the second, third, fourth order effects of what regulation does, or repealing regulation.
Yeah.
And and people also complain about, hey, there's they cut off Parler, this ecosystem cut off Parler, right? And we're giving too much power to these media companies, or these tech companies, right? Which there is some argument to be made for that, but it's also an argument that's being exploited by some very unscrupulous, politicians out there to play on people's emotions, that they're being
Right.
censored and that they should
Right.
get rid of Section 230. You really need to think about this and dig into it yourself and really get an opinion on it. But in general, my opinion is that you always want an innovative economy, because that's given us all this great stuff, right? And improved our lives dramatically, because capital can flow to companies that have great ideas, and they can take that capital and produce innovative products that improve our lives and make our lives easier or more efficient, but they also change them too. So we're living in a very interesting time, and I think when historians look at this, they will they will be amazed at some of the changes we've gone through and the arguments that we've had.
Right. Right. And just to be specific for everybody here, so we're talking about Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. That's where the language was put in place that protected companies from content that users posted before anyone really had any idea of the social media landscape that we'd be in right now.
And when you think about it, right, like if CNN or some of these other like media companies, like say they said, hey, the only thing we're going to show is the stuff that people send us, right? Like that's just going to play on CNN 24 hours a day. What people like, they would get sued out of fucking existence, right? Like totally. And libel's hard to prove, but there's standards that are applied to stuff that gets broadcasted for good reason too, right? And you even seen with some of these other companies like Newsmax, OAN, they are getting they're going to get the shit suit out of them by the was it the Dominion folks, right? Because they said, hey, you have said stuff about our company that is not true in any way, shape, or form, and we have like an incredibly strong defamation and libel suit here, which is extremely hard to prove in court. But I mean, this time, like, I think that they may have him by the balls, and you saw it, if you had seen this, right? These companies then, like OAN and Newsmax, then had gotten and had to get people on and did this like segment, right, where they had like some sort of expert on on voting machines, and they
Uh-huh.
basically like interviewed this expert for and they asked him like, was there any interference in the 2020 election, and the guy was like, no. Right. And so, and they had to say like, hey, we want to talk about some things about the election. And then they interviewed this guy to basically like try and set the record straight. So when they go to court, they can say like, oh, no. Even though we said all these things, we set the record straight. Right.
Right. Right.
And so that's where the Section 230 stuff comes into play.
Yeah.
Whereas, on, you can get on the internet and say anything you want. I mean, so
yeah,
I don't know. It's wild.
Yeah, it's wild. All right. Well, that wraps up the show for the week, everyone. Kyle, you got any last words for the audience before we sign out here?
No, nothing, as always, check out my website, sitrep.com. If you got any questions about, going to an MBA program or, professional services work. And I also did a podcast with this dude about like men's mental health. It's the Manage podcast. And that'll be coming out here in a few weeks. So
oh, cool. Right on, man.
I'm excited to do that. But it's like a one-time thing. I'm not cheating on you, Mark. Don't worry. So
I feel so hurt, Kyle.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. As always, we're going to ask, if you're listening to the show, go ahead and subscribe to it and get it delivered to your box every week. And then also, if you can go on to, whatever service you're looking at and leave us a review, that gives us feedback on how you're viewing the show, and then helps other veterans find this podcast so that you can help them through their journey in leaving the military as well. So thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone.